Entitled family loses their private club membership and gets banned from the property. For context, I've been working at a resort restaurant for almost 4 years that also operates as a private club for members. As you'd probably expect, most, if not all, of our members are very rich people who usually either own or manage some major successful business or inherited money from a family member. Despite their privilege, however, it hasn't stopped these people from being kind and respectful towards the staff and guests. They're honestly really sweet people most of the time, and only ever act entitled when they feel they haven't been given the basic treatment expected for any guest at our hotel. Even the owner himself, who visits every so often, doesn't ask for anything outrageous if he knows he can't get it from us. That doesn't mean entitled types aren't uncommon, but even still, their behavior doesn't last long. They can demand a manager all they want, but a manager can still say no and get away with it. This is because no matter how much they scream or cry, throw their money or titles around, or act like a jerk, our resort still puts the happiness of their staff over money. As the HR rep at my recent annual training said, no matter how important our members are or how much money they spend, that doesn't give them the right to treat others badly or act like they're better than those around them. We have no tolerance for that. So pull up a chair and get your popcorn, because I'm about to tell you the 3-part story about how a family of 3, a daughter, a mother, and a father, had their memberships completely revoked and their faces plastered on the "Do Not Serve" signs because they decided to throw a fit and threaten staff, managers, and eventually even one of the big bosses himself. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The daughter gets fired. This story started when a new girl, Heather, was hired to work as a waitress at the sports bar. Heather had known about the job through her parents, Mrs. Karen and Mr. Kevin, who were both members at our resort. Hiring children of members actually isn't uncommon, since whenever the parents needed their child to get a job, they'd automatically consider the resort due to their connections. However, you don't get any extra perks for being both a member and employee here. One night, when Heather was working, the bar got hit really hard, and it was an all-hands-on-deck kind of situation. So imagine the surprise when a frantic waitress ran across the table where Mrs. Karen, Mr. Kevin, and Heather were all sitting. Heather was happily laughing with her parents, eating food and drinking a cocktail, a massive no-no, by the way, for a multitude of reasons, and generally just slacking off. The employee walks up and says to Heather, "Hey, what are you doing? You're supposed to be working. I need your help here." Heather brushes the employee off and says, "I can't. I'm spending time with my parents right now." The employee responds, "You can't do this. We're in the middle of a shift. Please help me." Heather repeats her refusal. "Leave me alone. I'll work when my parents are gone." Her parents didn't say much as far as I can remember. So the employee, red-faced, did what any other person would do in this situation and told one of the managers, who was furious. When the manager approached the table, she was even angrier. Maybe it was the cocktail her employee was holding or the fact that Heather had misbehaved before, but the manager fired Heather that night and sent her home. I can't remember whether the parents were there or not at that moment, but I recall being told that once or twice they called to complain how it was unfair their child was fired because insert reason here. However, it wouldn't be the last time they intervened. Chapter 2. Mrs. Karen gets dragged out of the bar by security. About a week had passed since Heather was fired, and it's just a normal day for the sports bar. As typical, the employees just started arriving for work and started preparing the bar and the restaurant area for the guest who'd be arriving in an hour. Among those employees was the manager for that day, who I'll call Alice. Alice was actually one of the main managers of the sports bar and was very good at her job. I'd worked with her once before, and she's one of the kindest and most loving ladies you'd ever have the pleasure of working with. She was helping the employees with their duties when the doors to the bar opened unexpectedly. A guest coming into the bar before opening wasn't uncommon, but this wasn't any normal person. It was a very, very angry Mrs. Karen, who immediately, upon entering the bar, started screaming at the staff. "My daughter has COVID and now she's sick. I bet she got it from one of you, didn't she? I can't believe you monsters would do that to her. You got her fired and then you get her sick. Don't you know who I am?" For the record, this happened in mid to late 2020 when COVID-19 was still a big issue. Masks were mandatory for businesses and vaccines weren't even available to the public yet. The staff immediately stopped what they were doing and started watching. Keep in mind, this sports bar was actually one big massive room, so everyone there could see and hear everything. Alice tried to approach Miss Karen and asked her to calm down and to leave because they weren't open yet. However, Mrs. Karen kept screaming and making a major scene out of everything. Alice shifted to a more strict tone, insisting that Mrs. Karen leave or she'd get security involved. That's when Mrs. Karen noticed something behind Alice. One of the employees had gotten their phone out and started recording everything that was happening. I mean, obviously, someone would do that in this day and age, right? Mrs. Karen was furious and turned her anger onto the employee. She ran up to them and smacked their phone so hard it flew out of their hands and then proceeded to scream at them even louder than before. "Oh, that would be assault, ma'am." Alice immediately called security, who came to the bar almost immediately. Mrs. Karen had to be physically dragged out of the building by two very large security guards as she screamed every possible thing an entitled person could say. As you'd expect from a situation like this, an incident report had to be filed, and since Mrs. Karen was a member of the resort, her and Mr. Kevin's membership was temporarily suspended pending investigation. Security even had to print posters with Mrs. Karen's face on it, saying to keep watch and under no circumstances serve her or even her husband until further notice. And then it got worse. Chapter 3. Mr. Kevin threatens the general manager and loses his membership permanently. The time frame between Mrs. Karen's freakout and this wasn't ever told to me, but I remember it happened so soon after the original posters with Mrs. Karen on them hadn't even been taken down yet. Needless to say, Mr. Kevin, who was the primary holder of the family's membership, was furious about what happened. But what do you think he'd do? Did he try to reach out calmly and apologize? Did he wait a little for the dust to settle before repairing things? Did you even read or listen to the chapter's title? Most employees actually know where most of the major managers' offices are and know how to find them. While this was never taught to me when I first trained, I believe it's probably just a cautionary thing. One of the major managers, our resort's general director, had his office located in the main building and, as you'd guess, has power over various departments. As you'd expect, his name is everywhere, including major emails the members would get about newsletters and things like that. Everyone knew this man. They knew his face, knew his position, and knew what he did. On that fateful day, Mr. Kevin arrives at the resort and immediately started asking employees where he could find the general director. Some naive fool who probably had no idea of anything going on gave him the answer and told him where he could find the general director. Honestly, no idea why this employee gave the answer so willingly, and maybe I'll never know, but Mr. Kevin charged to the office. Mr. General Director was quietly sitting at his desk in his office when Mr. Kevin threw open the doors and, without hesitating, unloaded all of his fury upon the man. Mr. General Director, a man who I'd never seen angry or raise his voice, immediately told Mr. Kevin that he shouldn't be yelling at him and that he will get security involved. But, say it with me, Mr. Karen didn't stop. He, instead, kept insisting his membership be reinstated, that his wife be let back onto the resort, that this was all ridiculous, and that he spends thousands on us and that we should apologize. After all, it wasn't his fault. But Mr. General Director was not amused. Of course, he was aware of the situation with Mr. Kevin's family and the membership status, but his hands were tied, and what Mr. Kevin was doing at that moment wasn't exactly going to help him. I mean, would you help a man who just barged into your office unannounced and started screaming at you almost immediately? Just like his wife, security was called and Mr. Kevin was dragged out of the office and thrown off a property. I even think police got involved, but I can't remember for sure. What I do remember is this being the final straw for Mr. Kevin and his family. And courtesy of Mr. General Director, Mr. Kevin's entire family not only had their membership terminated, but they were even banned from the property. Well, what would you expect to happen? Play with fire, prepare to get burned, right? Chapter 4, Epilogue. I remember first learning about this story when I saw the posters for myself. Imagine a piece of paper with a family picture of Mr. Kevin and Mrs. Karen hung on the wall of security's office with these fine words written. Mr. Kevin and Mrs. Karen's membership has been suspended, no, terminated due to their poor treatment of staff and guests on our property. If you see these two anywhere on the property or at sports bar, do not serve them and immediately call security. Thank you. The poster stayed on that wall for almost 2 months. I'd often talk to some of the officers at security. I would visit them a lot before I started work for the day during the summer, and they never saw or heard from them again. As my coworker finished the story, she laughed loudly and said, "Those nutcases had it coming. Good riddance." And as far as I know, none of them were ever heard from again. I agree. Don't be an entitled jerk. Did you not think this story was crazy? Not only 3 and 4 parts of it when one part alone was insane. Wow, how would you handled this? Entitled Karen Lean story time. Hit a bike, lose your house. Many years ago, in a land a few blocks away, I loved to ride my bicycle. Single mother, no car. It was nothing really special, but it got me all over town. I mostly kept on sidewalks because traffic can be filled with too many entitled drivers. So I got to a corner, and I saw a car coming up to the side street to the stop sign. The driver slowed way down, so I assumed he would stop where he was supposed to. He didn't, my bad, because I had already started to ride my bike off the curb into the street in front of him. You guessed it, crunch. I squirmed my way from under the rest of my bike in the car and started checking myself for injuries. Just a bruised knee, so I was very lucky. The driver got out of his car and yelled at me for being in his way. Didn't even ask if I was okay, and I yelled at him for running a stop sign. A passerby checked on me and called the police. While I was safely back on the sidewalk with the passerby, the driver pulled his car about 5 to 6 feet forward, dragging my bike. I think he knew he was in trouble, so he altered the accident site to look like he was already around the corner, because when the police came, that's what he told them. He said he stopped, proceeded around the corner, and I just barreled out into his path. The police officer asked for my story, and I asked him to ask the driver to back his car up a bit, and I'd show the officer exactly where we both were at the time of the accident. He was wondering how I could be so positive, but then, once the driver moved his car, I pointed to the scrapes in the street that my bike had made when I was hit. The driver got the ticket, and I got his information. I wrote several letters to him asking him to replace my bike, but he ignored them. I finally had to take him to small claims court to be compensated for my squished bike. He did not show up. The judge reviewed all of my evidence and awarded me the cost of a new bike plus pain and suffering for my bruised knee. The court served him those papers, but he ignored them too. Now I'm frustrated. No money and no bike. And the real entitlement begins. I found another second-hand bike, and I start riding around again. I decide to pedal by the driver's house, just because I'm curious, and there's a for sale sign on his lawn. So he's trying to move and make a getaway just to avoid paying me. I went home, I gathered all of my paperwork regarding the judgment, and I head to the courthouse. There, I filed a lien against his house for the judgment amount, and then I called his realtor and informed her of the judgment and lien. She called the driver, and now, 6 months or so after the accident, I finally hear from the driver. He called and threatened me over the phone, telling me that he had witnesses who could prove that I was wrong about how the accident happened. I informed him that the time to have brought those witnesses was at the court date, which he missed. He told me that I'd better take the lien off the house, and I refused. He tried to tell me that he could sell it, then he would pay me. I told him, well, hey, that's not the way it works. You pay me, and then I take the lien off. He growled something and then hung up on me. 2 months later, I get a call from the realtor who wants to stop by and drop off a check. I sign the lien release and get a cashier's check, and my kids had a great Christmas. And if you're wondering, his actual ticket was for not having insurance, not for hitting a pedestrian in a crosswalk. This is several layers of bad. If you're going to hit somebody and then just alter the scene, not have insurance, then get a lien on your house and so just make that what it takes to pay, this guy is seriously bad news. How would have you handled it? Holy cow, man. Neighbors cut down my tree. I believe my neighbor has cut down a tree on my property. We have had minor issues since we bought our home. Our one neighbor owns the property his home is on, as well as the rest of that side of the street. He'd own the entire side of the street if he had our lot as well. He tried to buy when it went up for sale, but he was offering a small amount just for the land. We bought the house as a fixer-upper home to live in and hopefully start our family. Neighbors' dogs used to end up in our yard, which wasn't really an issue till we got our own dog, when I finally had to say something. The dogs haven't been back on our property, but we haven't been friendly since this incident. One morning in 2021, we came outside to find them putting up a fence. I was confused, as I thought they were actually erecting the fence on my property, but I realized I wasn't 100% sure, so I had a survey done. They were in the right with their fence, but I was glad to have a better understanding of my area. They actually disagreed with the survey and asked who we used, and then had a survey done by a different company. They never said anything about it to us, so I assumed that we were in agreement about the property line. However, there is one area, now the area in contention, where they actually pulled up the wooden stake and tossed it aside after a week or so, but it was in an unsightly area. And while it's not okay to move the actual metal markers, I guess it's okay to remove the wooden stakes, so I didn't think much of it. The property line is clear till this point, where there's a small group of trees and saplings, and then there's the driveway, which they have an easement for, which allows use of 75 square feet of my yard. This easement is where I think we are having confusion. It seems they think it extends further back than it does, or I don't understand how the line travels from that point to the front of the lot. Back in August of this year, we had an arborist out to quote cutting down a few trees. He was also going to trim a tree that was seemingly on my property, but leaning over my neighbor's driveway pretty extensively. While the arborist and I were talking, my neighbor's wife came out and ranted at me and the arborist to cut it all down. Please, cut it all down. I've never spoken to this woman, so I was just kind of taken aback. I laughed and she went away, and me and the arborist continued talking. We have had some personal issues pop up, so we had to postpone getting the arborist back out, but plan to schedule something for the future. Before we could do this, a few weeks ago now, my wife received a message on social media from my neighbor's wife, saying basically, we are renting a lathe and chopping a chunk of that tree that leans over our driveway. Not sure whose property it's on, just letting you know. It struck me as odd that she was saying she doesn't know whose tree it is, as we have each had a survey done. But since she was saying they were cutting a chunk of the tree hanging over their driveway, it sounded to me like they were just trimming their side, so I wasn't too concerned. Wife replied, "Oh yeah, do whatever. We have been meaning to get an arborist out, just had some personal stuff pop up." She replied that she was sorry to hear that and maybe we would want to toss them some money for the lathe and they could help us out. The trees I need cut are leaning toward my house or growing through a chain link fence, so I really want an actual arborist to do the work, so we just said that we'd think about it. I came home from work that night to discover that my neighbor had clear cut a small group of saplings as well as 2 full growth trees. One full tree seems to have been on my property as well as a couple of saplings. He did the work himself. He owns a construction and landscaping company. If I thought this was an honest mistake, that would be one thing, but we have both had surveys done and he owns a business where he deals with this kind of thing. So I feel like he knows how big of a deal it is to do this and just thinks that we won't retaliate because we're poor. I keep saying it appears the tree is on my property. The lot lines are very clear until this small patch of trees that he cut down. There is an easement allowing them to use 75 square feet of my yard for their driveway. This tree area is on the property line and the easement stops before it. The full growth trees they cut were side by side with it, looking to me like one was on my side and one was on his side. I spoke with an arborist friend in another state, and he said that I should contact a lawyer and possibly file a police report. I've contacted my surveyor to have him come out and confirm the lines for me, but that'll cost me $400 when I've already spent $2,000 on a survey. I have some calls in to a couple of lawyers who deal with real estate stuff, wondering if anyone has any advice or anything that I should gather before heading to the lawyer. I assume confirming the plot lines will be the first step. Also, I didn't intend to give them permission to cut down any trees on our property, but we did tell them to do whatever in response to them saying that they'd be cutting a chunk of one tree. It's in writing as it's social media, so I think it's clear we meant do whatever in regards to them trimming the one tree, but will that end up biting me in the butt? Not sure this is worth suing over. I don't want to blow up the neighborhood, but I also don't want this guy to walk all over us. Like I said, I thought if this were some honest mistake, I'd feel differently, but I really think this is just a case of my neighbor deciding he was going to do whatever he felt like. Do I have options aside from taking him to court? Was considering having the lawyer just send a letter explaining that I will take action if he does anything else. I don't want to blow up my neighborhood, but I'm just not sure what else to do here. Do you agree with this? Your neighbor committed a crime. He removed the survey stakes and cut down trees on your property. Call the township zoning officer and the police. It's a crime to remove the property marker placed in the ground by a surveyor. That's destruction of property. And moving a boundary marker, big fines in New Jersey, it could be jail time and a $25,000 fine. I wonder if OP has the ground to stand on where he said do whatever, but look, the other guy just literally broke the law. What would you do? Would you lawyer up? Entitled neighbors from walking into my house to eyeing up my garden. So I first met James and Rose when I heard my doorbell ring. I head downstairs and find them already in my living room. Yep, my girlfriend opened the door and they just waltzed right in like they owned the place. Awkwardly said hello while guiding them back out the front door. I thought that was that, but boy was I wrong. James and Rose had bought an ex-council house that had been badly damaged by the last tenants. I'm talking busted walls, shattered windows, you name it. The house was listed accurately, so none of this was a surprise to them. Strangely, I never had problems with the people who used to rent. I was amazed when they left and I saw the damage that they'd done. James and Rose decided that I'd be helping them out and had the audacity to come over with a contract that they drafted, stating that their builders can use my garden, my bathroom, and that they could use my kitchen whenever they needed until theirs was installed. Them handing me this contract was the second time I had ever interacted with them. I went around and I told them it was ludicrous and to just shove it. They weren't pleased and slammed the door in my face. Not too long after, I find them stood in my back garden. My girlfriend had been hanging up laundry and they'd apparently heard her and decided to let themselves through my front yard, around the side of my house, and right up to her. Girlfriend was practically frozen holding up a pair of her pants while they were just standing there, looking around and smiling. They then suggested, given how unhelpful I'd been with their renovations, that I host a barbecue for them and their friends. What friends, you ask? Beats me. I shut that down quick and told them to never come through to my back garden again. But they weren't done and couldn't leave yet. They had the gall to propose, straight after being told to get the heck out, that I give up roughly 1/5 of my garden so our gardens could be equally sized. I told them in no uncertain terms that they can forget it. Not my problem they bought a house with a smaller garden. I was seeing red, and I think they knew that they'd pushed it too far as they scampered away. Well, I guess that James and Rose decided that since I wouldn't willingly give them part of my garden, that they'd try taking it instead. From my back room, I saw some guy standing at the end of my garden. I went out to ask who he was and how the heck he got there, when in saunters, you guessed it, James and Rose. Turns out, James and Rose had torn down our adjoining fence, and this guy was planning where the new one would go, clearly not having been told that it's my garden, and I absolutely was not on board with this plan. Oh, but wait, they also peeped through my windows and had questions about my belongings. I do kickboxing and have a bob, a life-size training dummy, and did I know that it's scary and should probably be moved away from the window? They didn't want to see it while they were enjoying their newly enlarged garden. I calmly told the man that I was keeping all of my garden and none of them had my permission to be there. I also informed them that if I catch them in my garden again, they're volunteering to be my new Bob. Last I heard, they tried to bully our 70-year-old neighbor into giving up part of his garden. He's got early onset dementia, and 4 of his 5 sons visit regularly, but they don't live with him. I stay in contact with them as I go around to help my neighbor now and then, or just to chat and keep him company. He's a really cool guy, and hearing him upset about some contract and losing where his shed is, and I was fighting not to see red. One text to his sons, and that nonsense was shut down real quick. I never thought I'd meet people this entitled, but here we are. Needless to say, James and Rose have kept their distance since my very explicit warnings, which extend to bothering our dear old neighbor too. My girlfriend is back to hanging up washing outside, but she won't open the front door without checking the ring cam first now, just in case it's them. They also concreted over all their front and back gardens and then got 4 cats. The amount of cat dung I have to pick up every day is wild. I've taken to picking it up and dumping the bags on their driveway. I mean, they're just hated around here. A guy called Jim is our local handyman, and he's great at all those things that you can't do, don't have the tools for, or don't have the skill to manage. Apparently, after the first job, he doubled his daily rate just for them. Either they won't hire him, or he'll get double the money. Win-win. I wonder if they're just trying to do this because they think the older gentleman won't do anything about it, just like taking advantage. But when you or I step in and say, no, this is our property and you can't have it, what do you think they do? They'll back away. What would have you done? What would you do if this happened to you? Purchase first home. Just notified about upcoming $60 million community center being built across the street. My wife and I just purchased our first home in a popular suburb in northeast Indiana, Fishers, Indiana to be precise. We closed on the home in May of this year. An older home built in the 1950s, but it had been meticulously maintained and was sitting on over 1 acre of land. Additionally, our home is located on top of a small hill, which overlooks a beautiful 110-acre farm. Like, seriously, the view is gorgeous. Well, approximately 1 month after closing, the wife and I were passively watching the local news one night and were shocked when the camera suddenly panned to a shot of our home. Our local town was proposing a new $60 million 25-acre community center that would be built on the 110-acre farm that I mentioned above. The entrance to this community center would essentially be perpendicular to our driveway. I immediately began making phone calls to the city, talking to neighbors and so on, trying to learn more about this project and the impact it'll have on our home and neighborhood. Information is extremely hard to come by, so I'm curious if anyone has gone through something similar. As I mentioned previously, our home was built in the 1950s. The home, along with our 4 neighbors, make up a tiny subdivision. We do not have an HOA. There are no easements on our property besides a small 7.5-foot utility easement on the back side of our property. There is no right-of-way easement and no sidewalks on our road. The road we're on is relatively busy as there's an elementary school 400 meters north of our home. Additionally, and like I mentioned before, our home is built on top of a small but steep hill. I don't believe it would be possible to build a sidewalk on our road without some type of retaining wall. If the city attempted to widen the existing 2-lane road into our property, I genuinely don't think my small car could make it up the driveway without scraping the front bumper. Extending the road to the opposite side, the east, would also cause problems as there is a massive drainage directly to the east of the current road. I'm not in civil engineering, but that sounds like an extremely expensive undertaking if they wanted to move that drainage to make space for a wider road. So my questions are, has anyone gone through something similar before? What should I expect? So far, I've received 0 communication from the city about their plans, their construction timelines, and so on. And since there are no easements on my property, how much power do I have here? If they ask to take X amount of land from me, is it smart to simply say no? And how's property value impacted by a massive building like this? Obviously, the increase in traffic will be brutal, but I'm curious if there are actually some benefits of being this close to a new state-of-the-art complex. So how likely is it that the city would issue some type of eminent domain on our property? Our neighbors seem to think that the city may attempt to purchase our entire subdivision, but all 5 homes in our division were sold and bought in the past 12 months. The city had ample time to buy up all these homes and obviously chose not to. There's a ton of more information and details and concerns that I'll hold off at sharing at this point, so if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer. Obviously, I knew that eventually the farmland might be sold, but it sucks that it happened literally a month after buying our first home. An update. Realize this post came across as me being a grumpy new homeowner. Yes, there's probably some truth to that. I mentioned this in a comment, but I'm actually okay with the physical build side of the center. What makes me nervous is having the entrance to a 370 car community center perpendicular with my already small driveway. And I've seen the generic press release that the city put out. I've seen the build plans. I've seen the survey and the renderings. I have yet to see any documents explaining how the city will manage traffic flow, noise and light pollution, and so on. I expressed my concerns to the city and was told, "We understand that increased traffic is a concern for local residents. We're continuing to consider possible options in terms of road improvements." I guess my assumption would be that all these details would be finalized before getting city council approval, but I guess that's not how these things work. Do you agree with this comment saying that you won't have any notice on this unless you sign up for it and that you should not volunteer to give your property away? I wouldn't, would you? HOA illegally tows my company car from my private garage with updates. Check out this video in podcast form by searching Austin Stories wherever you listen, or check the video description for a link. Okay, so back in May, I was in a car accident in my company car. It got totaled by my insurance. I choose to keep it because it was still drivable and I had just had a lot of work done to it, like a new wrap, motor, and trans were just rebuilt 18 months ago. That forced me to file for a salvage title and return to my registration. So I parked it in my private garage that doesn't have a garage door. It sat without any notice or complaint for 5 months. I removed the trunk lid to get some custom wiring done on the inside of it, and the very next day, it was gone out of my garage. I called the cops. They checked to see if it was towed, and they don't have it on the list of towed cars. So we start filling out the stolen vehicle report, and halfway through, I get a call from the HOA telling me that they towed the car. So I cancel the report and ask dispatch to send police to the tow yard. I head over to the tow yard as well. When I arrive, the manager is standing right in the front area. I tell him, "You stole my car and I want it returned. Cops are on the way." His response is, "I didn't steal crap of your property. The manager had me tow it." I ask if it was my management or landlord or the HOA management who authorized it. He ignored me and went in office a few minutes later, and he returns with a body cam, a taser, and a gun. I at this time walked into the open tow yard to try to see if I could see my car, and I can't locate it. I hear, "Get the heck out of the yard or I'll tase you." I turn to see Mr. Wannabe Cop and Tow Manager walking up to me. I freeze up and start shutting down due to my autism. I just don't move or say anything. I'm able to center myself enough to start walking as he starts to push me. Mind you, I'm 6 foot 300 pounds. He's maybe 175 pounds soaking wet and 6 inches shorter than me. I'm about to turn to grab him as I see cops pulling up. So I just calmly walk towards the cops, ignoring the guy as I walk out the gate. The cops tell me it's a civil matter and that I have to take him to court. They can't do anything. So I leave and head to the court to file the paperwork. Ends up taking a month to get the papers filed because I had to send a demand letter and so on before I could file. I also contact the HOA management company and inform them of the fact that the tow company business license is revoked. Also of the many violations they committed by having the car towed. In turn, the 22-year-old idiot that's in charge of our property tells me that if I file a lawsuit, him and his buddies will make me regret that choice. I file a TPO that day and have it served on him as well. I get all that done, and then the HOA VP reaches out to me on Facebook asking me to attend the HOA meeting. I inform him in the chat logs that HOA manager has TPO, he's not to be there. So I plan to be at the meeting the next day with all my documentation, and I work out a solution that's fair to everyone. I show up to the meeting with several owners who were on my side and witnesses to the towing without notice, the revoked towing company license, and so on. I see TPO guy immediately and inform him that he needs to leave, that he's in violation. That is when the HOA VP tells me that he has cops on the way to trespass me from the clubhouse because I'm not an owner. I leave without incident or yelling. We go to court 3 days later and beat him in court. FHOA. Our HOA is so shady that they had my car towed without notice from my private garage and tried to justify it by blaming the county codes for the reason. This was in September. I filed a lawsuit because they refused to speak to me about it. I went to court suing both the HOA and the tow company because in our CC&Rs about parking, it states specifically that the penalty for any violation is a $100 fine, which is the max allowed by the law. They also tried to take a picture of a violation notice on my car, but forgot to delete the metadata from the photo. The data showed up with a date taken 1 day after it was towed. When the judge looked at that metadata info, and when the HOA told the judge they don't own our roads, they're county property. The judge immediately stopped the case and said that she heard enough. The HOA is not allowed to tow cars in the neighborhood anymore, period. She ordered the HOA to pay the $2,400+ tow bill and told me to file a small claims action to get paid for loss of use. When we walked out of that courtroom, the tow company driver said, "We will leave your car out on the street in front of the tow yard." I told them, "Tow it back to my house." He said no. I turned back to the judge and asked, "Could you please have them return the car to where they towed it from?" The judge stands up from her chair and said, "If he wants you to tow it to New York, you'll do it and you'll charge the HOA whatever the cost. You're lucky you're not going to jail for auto theft." The HOA manager started to speak and was immediately interrupted by the judge. "Bailiff, arrest him." Oh, the sweet taste of justice. Going to court next week for the small claims hearing on the loss of use and damage done to my car while it was at the tow yard. The update: they filed an appeal of this ruling and we are waiting to go back in front of the district judge, so the small claims action is held until the ruling is made. You gotta stand up for yourself in front of the HOA and tow companies like this, or else they'll take advantage of you if you're not careful. What would have you done? How would you handle this corrupt and terrible HOA? Board member rant. Yes, I do sit on an HOA board, but hear me out. I joined the board because I sat on the social committee and our chairperson wanted to move on, and we didn't want the social committee to end because of that. Since then, it's been nothing but heck dealing with these people. Where it started, there were several vacancies on the board due to some community members complaining that the previous board just wasn't being transparent and they were taking votes outside of the monthly board meeting and holding secret meetings. Two of those people who were the most vocal about the lack of transparency were elected to the board, along with me and 2 other people. It's a 7-person board. Almost immediately, 2 people wanted to take votes and get rid of our management company and all of this other stuff in a special meeting outside of the monthly meeting before we even were officially seated on the board. The gentleman of the 2 at one meeting actually stood up and demanded a vote to fire the management company in 30 days. This gentleman was previously on the board, but quit after the previous board fired a management company. He lobbied to get hired because they were very bad. So I think his agenda was to get that company back on. Anyway, I called him out on the BS. How can you be taking votes outside of the meeting after complaining about that very thing? Of course, that made me an immediate outcast and put a target on me and the social committee's back. At the first meeting, what they did tell me was that I didn't have an approved budget. I let them know that the budget was approved prior to 2023 by the previous board. I was told that it didn't matter, this board didn't approve it. Prior to me being in the board, we had a Valentine's Day party at the neighborhood bar, and I was accused of giving people alcohol and said that the whole event put the HOA at risk. This was prior to me becoming a board member. However, the previous social chair said that they talked to the lawyers and the insurance, and because we were not providing alcohol, we were fine. This fell on deaf ears, and it still gets brought up every meeting since. At one meeting, they were so concerned that our social events were putting the HOA at risk that they didn't want the HOA's name on any of the flyers of the events that the HOA was sponsoring. At the last meeting, I got dinged because I wasn't putting the HOA name on any of the flyers. Next, we were having a Memorial Day pool event. The Wednesday before Memorial Day, they held a special meeting and started telling me that the event was illegal. One of the new members was a paralegal, and she has a lot of experience in law, so she knows. It didn't matter that this was like the second time that we've had this exact event, and we cleared them before with our legal and insurance company. After scrambling the whole next couple of days, the lawyer and the insurance company came back and said that we told the board that we had sufficient coverage. 2 members of the board came to the pool party and sat in the corner and just scowled. After they left, the fire department showed up checking capacity. Fire department come out on Memorial Day by just coincidence. I don't know, but it is shady. Also, at the special meeting, they voted to fire the management company and give them a 60-day notice. I became very frustrated at that point, and I voiced my concerns about these special meetings and making decisions outside the board meeting. I kid you not, but one board member said, "We are the HOA and we can actually do what we want. If needed, we can vote to change the bylaws to allow it." I was told that if I didn't like it, I could quit. I told him that yes, I will quit, but not until after the next board meeting so I can tell the neighborhood exactly what's going on in these special meetings and what this board thinks that they can do. I was completely upset at that point, and I walked out of the meeting saying that I wasn't going to be any part of this. Apparently, after I left, they made a motion to dismantle the social committee completely. At the next board meeting, they took a vote on that, and it didn't pass. But seriously, why wouldn't the HOA want to have a social committee? His family? So after that, 4 members quit. So there's only 3 of us left. And we already voted to fire the management company, so we have to do the business of finding a new management company with only 3. Needless to say, I did not volunteer to do any of that work. We did pick up 2 new members who took charge of that. After that, it was somewhat quiet. However, 2 of the members admitted to never reading the board packets and didn't show to meetings regarding hiring a new management company. And then, they just recently decided to take one of those board members that quit back onto the board. Now I am being asked for a full audit of all of my supplies. One board member asked me what have I done with the paper plates that I didn't use. Well, they're asking for a head count of all my past events. I didn't take head count because I didn't know we even needed to. I have also been accused of again not having a line-by-line budget. However, I've showed them the line-by-line budget several times, accused that I've not been transparent. However, I've turned in every receipt. The receipts are itemized, mind you. This is a $5,000 budget. I'm not going to get rich and live on some island for the rest of my days on that money. I am frustrated and defensive at this point. I've been accused of being just that, also starting fights, wanting drama. I just so want to quit the HOA, but the social committee and all the neighborhood events will also not happen, and no other person on the social committee wants to be on it. This sounds like a mess to deal with. It's a tough battle. You want to stay on to keep the committee alive, but staying on is a huge mental headache. What have you done? Entitled uncle wants to donate his part of the house, so my family is taking him to court. I'm a 17-year-old female living in a semi-small town in Bulgaria. Our family mostly consists of good and not argumentative people, except my uncle, 41 male. He's living in Berlin, Germany, and used to work as an opera singer. His biggest achievement is singing in La Scala. Our problems with him are not new. He's an alcoholic and the most entitled person that I know. Every time he comes back home, there are always scandals. I remember hiding under a table when I was 5 or 6 because I was scared of him. We didn't have much problems with him, but everything changed in 2020. He lives off of the country because he's unemployed. He says it's because of COVID, but the truth is that he got stopped in order to look after his boyfriend, 61 male. They got on bad terms with my mom, 45 female, because she wanted him to leave his boyfriend, who's only using him and has even called the police on him multiple times. I was still on good terms with him, and we talked weekly. However, one day, while talking about my favorite band, he just started screaming at me and calling them bad names. I got mad and I hung up on him. He was furious and started bombarding me with voice messages, calling me a bee, a prostitute, an addict, and so on. Mind you, I was 14 at the time. He also said that he will be coming to Bulgaria without notice and will beat me up until I learn my lesson. Later on, we got on good terms again because I'm a very forgiving person. A few months into it, I, again, broke things off with him because he started to send threats to my mom, wishing her cancer, calling her, my stepdad, an idiot and stuff. I told him that he's not mentally stable and that he needs to learn how to respect his family. We weren't talking for years after that. December 2023, he came back home for a month. He never apologized and demanded us to apologize for ruining his life. He told my mom that because of her and her bad karma, he has an alcohol addiction. He also told her that she has a child, me, because he let her use the house. 2 or 3 days into his visit, he became really violent and drank a lot, around 3 liters of beer and wine a day. He almost caused my grandpa, 75, a heart attack. His blood pressure was 200/140. That's a lot. Around 10 days later, he got an early ticket back to Berlin using my GPS money because he's broke as heck. And now he wants to donate his part of our house, 1/3, in order to take revenge on us. I made my mom call a lawyer, and now we will be proceeding with taking his part of the house. Super entitled here. There's no way around it. So you gotta stand up to family members like this. There's just no way around it. What would you do if you had a family like this? Entitled brother thinks I should buy a house and pay the bills to take care of him and his abusive mother. Until 2 years ago, I had a perfect 800 credit score. I never missed a payment. I lost my job for reporting my bosses for overlooking SA. So for 2 years, I've struggled finding work because as I found out a few months ago, the people I was reporting on were slandering me to potential employers, costing me a job using my MBA making $20 an hour in an office. My credit score is crap and I'm coasting on fumes. The worst part of this? My family doesn't know and is running around telling everyone that I refuse to help them keep a roof over their head. I'm near the point of being unable to buy food, and these jackwagons are telling people that I should buy them a place to live. The reason? My grandmother died of what I suspect was COVID. I worked with the public and caught it despite being vaxxed multiple times. So I wasn't going to be around a 60-plus-year-old woman with severe emphysema and risk getting her COVID. She was angry, but then she never really liked me, just needed me. He and my mother in her final days wormed her way into the house, thinking that they would in fact gain ownership of it if she died. Every time I ask what she died of, they just say that she was in the hospital and decided to just give up. Well, she's dead and they're facing a ticking clock because the house is being inherited in a 6-way split. This doesn't bother me because I was told years ago that I was getting nothing from her estate. I was told that the house would go into a trust and both my brothers and mother would be living there. My brother, who has spent his life bouncing from one multimillionaire relative's couch and wallet to another, thinks that I should buy a house for him and my deranged mother a place to live. The man who was given a house to live in when he finally decided to leave home at 25 thinks the man who was thrown out the week after graduation and lived in low-income housing at 17, too sick to take care of himself, should buy him a house. This isn't the first time he's said stuff like this, and it's surely not going to be the last, but it just infuriates me how twisted these people's logic is. I know this isn't the last time because I asked him several years ago what he will do when Grandma's dead. His rich uncle, who's cancer in remission, loses his cancer battle, and our mother is incapable of taking care of herself. It's all he has. His reply, I crap you not, was, well, I'll come live with you because you have to take care of me. We're family. When it's me, family means no help and self-sufficiency. When it's them, it means mandatory help and mandatory handouts. Am I wrong to be angry about them and their behaviors? I swear, having to deal with all these people who they've told lies and half-truths, coming up to me and shaming me before I correct them, makes me want to give up and just stop going out. These people are way entitled. You gotta step your foot down sometimes. I wonder if they're taking advantage right here. What do you think? The HOA president TOWS me. Your Honor, I'm no HOA member. Click the video on your screen to find out what happens to that nasty HOA, and I'll see you there.